Catching up here with Evil Dead Rise, and as is true with all the Evil Dead movies, the moral of the story is don't read a book.
No, the moral is don't listen to books on tape. That's the real problem.
Books on album. Right, don't do them together. Do one or the other, but not both. We got our great friend William Bibbiani here. You know him as Bibbs. He is a frequent guest here on Breakfast All Day and an expert on film in general, but horror in particular. So I definitely wanted to have his thoughts on Evil Dead Rise. Good to see you, Bibbs.
I'm your guy.
You are the guy for all seasons. If you've not subscribed yet, we'd love to have you. We do stuff like Evil Dead Rise, and we do little indies and documentaries, and we're heading into summer movie season, but we'll always have a good mix of stuff for you here at Breakfast All Day. So we'd love it if you would be a part of our community. My friend Bibbs, what is Evil Dead Rise about?
Mom? Mommy's with the maggots now.
Okay, Evil Dead Rise is the fourth film in the Evil Dead series, which began in the early 1980s and skyrocketed Sam Raimi to worldwide acclaim. The first film was so scary that Stephen King gave a quote for it, saying it was one of the best horror movies he'd ever seen. He was right. And that led to a really interesting progression of films, which got funnier, then dorkier, and then genuinely terrifying again. And now, about 10 years after the latest quasi-remake, we've got Evil Dead Rise, which is about a family in a dilapidated building. They find, after an earthquake, a copy of Nocturne de Monto, aka the Book of the Dead, in their basement with some recordings of it. They play the recordings. Whoopsie, demons. Mom gets possessed by a demon, starts mutilating themselves and everyone around them. It becomes an ultra-violent horror cornucopia. And of course, the only way to solve the problem is with the rigorous application of chainsaws. So, basically, keep one of these handy and you'll be fine.
Do you just have a chainsaw around in case there's a new Evil Dead movie?
Doesn't everyone?
Far be it from me to correct the expert. Is this not the fifth Evil Dead movie?
Did I say fourth? I meant fifth.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because Evil Dead 2, there's Army of Darkness, there's that Evil Dead reboot from 10 years ago.
There was a series, but that's not a movie. And you're right, it is the fifth. I don't know how I did that. Thank you for correcting me. I actually don't think there's been a dud in the series, actually. I think Evil Dead is one of the most consistent horror series we've had. They're very different films, even though they're all mostly pretty samey. Four of them begin with people read a book or hear a book on tape of reading a book. Demons come out and a whole bunch of people get possessed, and the only way to save your life and their souls is to dismember them in extremely gory fashion. They all have extremely gory elements, a little less so Army of Darkness. That got toned down a little bit into more of like a Hercules and Xena kind of tone, which, of course, Sam Raimi also produced. They're all kind of do the same thing, and they all do a pretty danged good job of it. In fact, my only real complaint with Evil Dead Rise is that after 5 films in the series, it's a little repetitive, and I feel that besides changing the locale, and a few gory twists. There's one really cool monster thing towards the end that we hadn't seen before. This is actually, in terms of the story, really familiar stuff. It's basically just taking the Evil Dead stuff that we love, putting it in a new locale, and I think hopefully trying to reach new audiences who maybe aren't used to something this daredevil, this virtuosic, and certainly this gory in a theater anymore. This kind of movie, this what we used to call splatstick or splatterhouse, used to be a lot more common in the 80s up until the early 90s. Kind of started falling out of favor, and then a movie that's this spectacularly bloody is really uncommon at a multiplex now.
Yeah, I saw it in the middle of the day in my charming little neighborhood here, and I wish it had been a packed theater, because I can imagine seeing it with a whole bunch of people. This is just like screaming and squirming and so fun as a communal experience.
It's exceptionally gory. It's got a really just nice, moody, gloomy style. I just, as I said on my podcast when we reviewed it, I just kept feeling like it was just holding itself back from becoming something new. Like, introduce this idea of what if your mother is possessed by a horrible demon, which of course happened in Evil Dead 2. But it felt like because we're in the family environment, there was so much more they could have played with and so much more they could have really gotten under your skin with it, that I just felt like they didn't want to explore that thematically very much, and they just kind of used it mostly as an excuse for more monster stuff. And the monster stuff is good. I really enjoyed the monster stuff. You're not as big a fan of the Evil Dead movies, are you, Christy?
No, I've seen them, but it's been a while. And I recall them being funny. I recall them being like that Sam Raimi mix of extreme gore, but also like laugh out loud because it's so ridiculous and insane.
That's what 2 and 3 were, yeah.
Like what we saw with Drag Me to Hell. Drag Me to Hell is a good example of that. And so I have memories of that being like that Raimi tone here. There's a thing with an eyeball here that I think is that kind of tone here. No, I thought this was so well made, and the pieces are familiar, but director Lee Cronin, I thought, really employed some cool camera work. He uses some split diopter shots, which I'm always a sucker for. They're kind of show-offy, but I thought also they were germane to what he's trying to convey in that moment, with like the mother in the foreground and the kids in the background, and just how unsettling all of that is simultaneously. There's a whole section through the peephole, like a fisheye with a peephole that, again, we've seen
that was fun.
This was very well done. Like what you see and what you don't see. The sound design, again, a signature of Raimi's films, like the crunching. Yeah, there's some cool stuff there.
Well, I think the thing that I think Sam Raimi did in the 80s, really laid down the gauntlet. And for a while, it seemed like people, like even the Coen brothers, who of course worked with Raimi in the early years, and he co-wrote the Hudsucker Proxy, were trying to get really ambitious with camera work. And a lot of the early Sam Raimi Evil Dead movies, and then just Sam Raimi's work in general, up until relatively recently, was a lot very whirling dervish. Very, hey, what if we just stuck the camera on a plank of wood and swung it around? Like, what kind of effect we have? But then they found a way to actually tell a story with that, and it ended up being very, very exciting. You were very aware of the filmmaker when you were watching the first couple of Evil Dead movies. You were aware that they were kind of showing off, but you were also aware that it worked and that they had something to prove, and they proved it. I don't feel like horror movies lately have been nearly as energetic stylistically as perhaps they could be. And I feel like the Evil Dead movies are an excuse for filmmakers to go a little nuts. And boy, are they going nuts. That this worked for Fede Alvarez in the remake, which I think is actually really excellent. And I think it works here too. And I want more of it, please. I want more of this energetic stuff. And I would like it to maybe expand out of the Evil Dead franchise so that we can see this approach to different ends. Or I would like to see the Evil Dead franchise, at least maybe plot-wise, start mixing it up a bit. And they introduce a few elements in this movie that are maybe not new, but solidify ideas about the sort of the lore of this series that are definitely something they can play with later regarding the Books of the Dead. And so hopefully that's laying groundwork for future films to go in slightly different directions.
Oh, of course there are more to go. Yes. And I thought everyone was good in this. Like Alyssa Sutherland as the mom deeply goes for it in extreme ways that are very unsettling. I found this very unsettling a lot of the time, maybe being a mom myself.
I've often said that one of the keys to making a great horror movie is, if it would have been an interesting movie before anything horrifying happened, you'll probably end up with a good movie. Too many horror movies just sort of rest on their laurels and just say, here are a couple of characters, and now we're going to kill them. Okay, fine. But if the characters were going through interesting journeys, interesting arcs before the nightmare truly begins, then the nightmare only amplifies that. And here we have a lot of really likable, interesting characters. I like everyone in that family. I think they're so likable, actually, for the most part, and they're so relatable that it's actually a little surprising to discover just how bad things go for some of them. Because you would imagine in a lot of movies, a lot of those characters would be safe. They're not.
It's a very, very bloody movie. I'll never look at my cheese grater in my kitchen drawer the same way.
That's a great bit. I was watching this movie and I was like, the Evil Dead movies have so many great, horrifying bits. And a lot of the ones that really stick with you are the ones that feel kind of simple. Like the guy getting, I forget who it was, but someone got stabbed in their Achilles tendon with like a pencil. in the first movie, and it broke off. But just like we know what a pencil feels like, we can imagine in our heads just how painful it would be to be stabbed with a pencil. And here, a cheese grater is just, we use it all the time, and we've all been done, oops, and like, we scratched ourselves or something. But to imagine that being used just on purpose to inflict harm is so visceral that it really stands out. And I think it's, even though a lot more elaborate stuff happens in this movie, weirdly enough, I think the cheese grater is the thing people are going to take from it.
Stuff like that is why I think this movie is very effective. So I'm saying like an 8.2. What is your number?
Wow. You're a little kinder than I am. I do feel like that the sameness of this gets in the way of it being a great recommendation for people who love this series. I think this is, sadly, I think it's actually the least interesting film in the series, but I still like it quite a bit. So I'm going to give it a 7.3.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Well, Evil Dead Rise is in theaters. Go check it out. Bibbs, come on back and hang out with us real soon. And thanks for filling in.
Anytime. I'll bring old chainsaw.